John Rainey.
And what is your relationship with the museum, John?
I'm a volunteer here. I do desk duty, docent duty with tours, and also some lunch and learns.
And what got you involved in it? Why are you interested in this?
Well, when I've always been interested in history, lifelong resident of Anderson County, and when I retired, I needed something to get involved in, and this was a good fit for me, and I've enjoyed it.
And what got you interested in Starr?
Born there, raised there, spent the first 41 years of my life living on old family property that had been in the family for 250 years.
And I know you're fixing to do a presentation here, but if you could name one or two things that people would be most surprised of about Starr, what would those be?
Probably how it was actually founded or came to be, and some of the interesting things that have happened that nobody really heard about, and some of the interesting things people from Starr have run into about hearing about their little town when they were in faraway places. Here. And today I'm going to talk about where I grew up and spent the first little over half of my life before I moved away. And that's going to be looking at it from a historical standpoint, and how did Starr ever become to be Starr, and we'll flow through. And I've got some pictures at the end of some very old houses that are still there. The area covers a wide area, and I'll explain that a little bit, but just kind of give you a broad brush, would entertain any questions. Always, when I do one of these things, ask. I do know there are some people from Starr here, lifelong friends here. Anybody else from Starr here today? Okay. Anybody, has everybody here been to Starr? Okay, so you know where it is. Okay. And you may, I know in doing some actual research, I found out some things that even growing up there I didn't know, because you grow up and you hear stories and tales and this type of thing. But hopefully it'll be interesting. We'll take questions and maybe learn a little bit about some things we didn't know. Now I'm going to start all the way back with what used to fascinate me as a kid growing up there. And I was kind of an odd product. I was only one of a couple of people in my generation living there amongst all the family. And I would frequent my granddaddy after school, and during the summer I stayed with him on the farm a lot, to the country stores. And at the country stores back in the late 50s, early 60s, every afternoon a lot of the farmers in the area, they would frequent these little country stores for a Pepsi Cola and a pack of Spanish roasted peanuts and discuss the events of the day. And the reason in my neck of the woods, which is over on the west side of Starr, everybody got a Pepsi was because one of my granddaddies, now I may get some of these people, when you kin to everybody, you forget who or how they come in line. My granddaddy's niece married a fellow that worked for Pepsi Cola Bottling Company. True story. So everybody immediately gets Pepsi. So from then on, they were doing Pepsis, and I'd hear these stories. And a couple of things I picked up on as a kid that I don't know if everybody in Starr heard this, but my group that I'll tell on myself was you'd hear this statement come up occasionally over a period of years. Something would happen. There'd be something built or moved, or something would happen around in Starr, the community, and it wouldn't suit, or they didn't, people didn't agree with what everybody wanted to do, and they would get in this thing, well, you know, the statement today, well, nothing ever changes around here. Yeah, nothing ever changes. And the statement would be made also, and it got made in by a preacher I will not name in church was that, when Jesus comes back for the second coming, he will have no problem whatsoever finding Starr, because it will not have changed since he left. So that statement came along, and then you would hear the things in the discussion with the boys. Now, these boys are my granddaddy's age. Now, I'm 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and they're, something would come up, and we don't tell this anywhere else. And I'd get told as a kid, like, you don't go to school and tell this. What you heard in there today, you don't take it. That just stays, that stays in the group. So that kind of morphs into things that go on when you grow up, and kind of set the stage so you'll understand my take on this thing. I'm grown, and I'm married, and my wife's getting to know me better, and things would come up, and I'd explain to her how we handled them in Starr. And that's my wife for 47 years has put up with me. And I would explain what we did, and I'd explain some of the things that, as growing up as a child and a young guy, that we did in Starr. I ain't gonna tell much of that, so and she put a name to these things, and she called them Starrisms. So she named it. And then something would come up later, she said, "Well, this gonna be another one of those Starrisms?" And most of them were just things that normal people do growing up in the country on the farm or whatever. Now, there was a few involved dynamite that she got a little upset about, but nobody died. But anyway, moving on, if we look at Starr, in my opinion, and in my thoughts, it's a great place to grow up. It was a great area to be in. All those of us who grew up there had all this land and farmland to play on, and creeks to go up and down. And, everybody had horses, and, you had all of that. And then too, you had, civilization, so to speak, 10 miles up the road in Anderson, so you weren't out in the woods, so we had a good time. And I've got some fond memories, and I guess it does, change you for the rest of your life. I do need to give some recognition. A lot of the material that I'm using, especially the dates and some things that, some facts, I got out of a book that was written by Mr. Frank Nixon, who was a lifelong family friend, knew him all my life, was mayor 1 or 2 times of the little town Starr, lived in Starr, great guy, knew him. And in I believe it was the late 70s or 80s, he went on a mission to write a book about Starr and spend a lot of time and frustration, and he wrote a book and gave most of the people around in Starr bought a copy, but there is a copy here at the research room at the museum. I don't know if you're going to find this in a bookstore anywhere, but it was a very interesting book, and I got a lot of stuff out of it from him. Also, I've got to give some credit to my teachers that I had, especially in high school, and especially one teacher who is a descendant of, as we get to that part, a founding father or whatever of Starr, but Miss Anna Dean Pennington, who was Miss Anna Dean Jones Pennington, was my history and psychology teacher, and she kind of spurred me to look at things a different way, and kind of pushed me to do some things maybe some other teachers wouldn't. It got me interested in history and that sort of thing, and it really helped me a long way through. So those 2 people I will give a lot of gratitude to for a start. Now, Starr. And excuse me if I go backwards with this thing or whatever. I'm not of the tech age, so we're going to be talking about an area. If you find Starr right here, this is an old map. To talk about Starr, you got to talk about the area right around the little town it stands today. But you're going to have to also move over to the Savannah River and over into this area right here. Because what I found as I started doing research, there really wouldn't be Starr if it weren't for these people that start off over here. And everything kind of grows, and people have reasons to move over this way, and then something else happens. So I'm going to kind of put through the events that took place. Now, who were the people who settled in Starr? Now, one thing you got to understand about Starr, if you live there and you grew up there in the community, you're talking about everybody, not everybody, most of the people were of about 5 or 6 families. You had families that owned huge expanses of land and had for 200 years, and they're all in their descendants are living on this land, here, 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 and here. So you've got a situation where most of the property all around the place is owned by just a few people. So people were close, people knew what everybody knew everybody, people knew what everybody was doing, and this sort of thing. But who were these people? If you look at who settled this part of Anderson County and families that are still in that area, in the Starr area today, most of the people, now again, you can never say all because there's always somebody creeps in from somewhere. Most of the people came from England, Scotland, Wales, or Ireland. They came from those places. Most families could trace their own back. I won't talk about anybody's family but my own, but my family basically originated in Wales. And I found that to be true because I was actually in Wales, and Brenda and my daughter at the time was with me on a business trip, and we looked in the phone book. And, a lot of people spell Rainey different ways. They spell it R-A-N-E-Y, da-da-da. But R-A-I-N-E-Y is not, in this country at least, the preferred spelling. We look in the phone book, and there were about 3 pages full of Rainey. And we'd always heard. And so here's another thing. Nobody in those days wrote down that on January the 5th, 17 whatever, Brother Bob showed up. I mean, you're just listening to these stories that generate where they came from, about England. I think, about England. So I know my family came from Wales, and again, I can pretty much pin some families did come from Scotland and Ireland. So these are the people that settled it. Now, these people that came in those early times, and I'm talking around the early to mid 1700s. Now, think about this. When we talk about age, and I didn't really realize this, Starr and the Starr area that I'm talking about is old. People have been there for a long time, from the early 1700s. And families of those people are still there today. So that's kind of unique in one way. Now, they came, a lot of them, basically with land grants from the king or from England, however they were digging. And and it's not quite like the Pilgrims and the Puritans and these people that settled the Northeast, because that happened 100 years previous in the early 1600s. By the time the early 1700s come along, Charleston's a city on the coast, but most of the things are up in the Northeast and the coastal areas. And now the British have said, this colonization is a good thing. We got our empire is expanding. We're making money. We're having, this is a good thing. So we're pushing down, we're pushing in, and here comes the settlers down this way. And a lot of these people, however, and I don't know how we would research back to get the exact story. These people, a lot of people were awarded huge amounts of land and land grants from the government of England, the King of England, however you want to phrase it, to come settle this property. Now, in the early 1700s, 1720, 1730, people are settling, and they're coming, I knew I'd do that. They're settling kind of this way, coming from up this way. And that's primarily because they're following rivers, they're following other roads. And where is there a seat of government established in the area? And if you go back to those terms in the early 1700s, late 1600s, the seat of government in this whole area was Pendleton, the Pendleton district, which is basically what we call Anderson and Pickens County today. So these people are coming via the British. British are controlling everything. And the British are moving them down to their property, which has already been surveyed. This area was an easy area to come into because of the Cherokee Indians, because they were friendly. They weren't hostile. They got along with the British. They knew the trails. And that's another significant issue. They had plenty of trails through here, the Indians, for 1,000 years. Excuse me, they were using the Savannah River to go up and down. So they had been, they had been established here for a long time, but they didn't really live here. They were living in a huge settlement up around, Dustin may correct me, but the Kiwi area up there, and settlements down around Augusta and Columbia, but they traveled through here. They were friendly. They helped the surveyors. The surveyors let them survey out all this land, and they started awarding it to people. And the people start coming and taking the land. Now, it wasn't like the Pilgrims. They weren't coming because that these people weren't coming because they were persecuted for their religion. They weren't coming, but they were coming for a better way of life and to own land, which was very hard to do if you lived in England or the English Empire, if you weren't a royal. So they get this land and they come, and the British had supply depots in Pendleton and other areas, and they're helping supply these people. They didn't have to come and, have nothing but clothes on their back. These people came with some means. They came as an orchestrated movement in the 1730s and 40s down into these areas and started establishing homes and homesteads. Now, if you look at an area settling, you get into what comes first, it tells you it's going to turn into something. And usually most historians agree that the first things that start cropping up after about a generation are churches in that day. The people get enough people here, they get enough means, they got a little money, they group it together, they build churches. So I'm going to start with, the churches that get established, which some of the dates may shock you a little bit, some may not. But if I go back, in these churches basically start over in this area here, down by the river, which in that day was a straight shot of what is now today Highway 187, which was an Indian trail. They turned into a road. They shot straight up to the Pendleton district, or either they could come down the Seneca River and get into the Savannah River and be right there. So these people were close to the Pendleton district. They were close to supplies. They could get supplied. If I look back in that area, and the first church I could find recorded was in the Providence Church area, Roberts Church area, and it was called Shockley Ferry Baptist, and it was established in 1776, before the Revolutionary War. It has a little history, like a lot of things do. It went on until 1824 and was defrocked because they were selling wheat in the church yard on Sunday after church to some of the other people, and that was against the church rules. But it was reestablished in 17 or 1859 by some of the same people as Shiloh Baptist Church. So it went away, and 50 years later it comes back. The second oldest church in the area is Mountain Creek Baptist Church. The people settled that, made a church there in 1789. And Mountain Creek Church, how many know where that is? Located on Highway 29. But from Mountain Creek Church, and you start put this picture together about Starr. From Mountain Creek Church, you just a hop and a skip to Starr on the back roads. So again, it's close, but it's not there. The next church in the area was a Methodist Episcopal church, which is still there. Not a Methodist Episcopal, but Ruhamer, 1822, which was established, it's where 29, close to where 29 Highway and Highway 412 or Rainey Road intersect. The next church comes in 1824, Crossroads Baptist. Now, Crossroads Baptist was actually built at the intersection of Highway. It was a wooden building, Highway 181 or Smith McGee Highway, and Highway 412 or Rainey Road in Starr. So now that's they're moving on over. And then it was moved in 1858 to its present location right there on 81 in Starr. And it is rumored to be the first rural church in Anderson County to be made entirely out of brick. I'll go with that as being true. That's what rumor is. Then the next church is Bethesda Methodist Church, which was originally established in 1850. And it was on Agnew, if you're familiar with Starr, Agnew Road, which runs kind of diagonal and kind of northwest from 81, a wooden building. And it was moved to its present location in 1895. So you can see the progression of the churches. They're moving now. I have some history with Ruhamer and Bethesda from the reasoning that was given by some people of starting Bethesda were my relatives, because some of my relatives lived within 2 miles of Starr, but it was 8 miles over to Ruhamer. So some of them decided we need a church closer to us, and for a period of time I went to Ruhamer, then I went to Starr, and family members were in both places, or both churches. But for most of the time you had the same preacher anyway, so it didn't make any difference. So now we got the churches established, and you see how they kind of move. And we look at some early schools. Everybody knows the old wooden schools and 2-room schools that were still around in my day. Those came in the early 1900s. If you go back to the old schools, one of the first schools, however, in the area was Starr School. And it was established and certified by the state in 1846, the first school. Now there's a little discrepancy in where it was. Some accounts say it was at the intersection of Highway 181, Smith McGee Highway, and 412, Rainey Road, and it was a wood building. Some accounts put it at the intersection today of Highway 181, Smith McGee, and 81 in the fort. Well, 81's been moved, so that's another thing about Starr. Jesus is going to have a hard time because something did change. They moved the road. They moved 81 over to the railroad tracks. And so now if you go down that road, 81 used to take you straight through Starr, right through the middle of whatever was there, to a 90-degree curve, which usually entangled a vehicle accident about once a month, and on down through. Now you go the old railroad track, which north of Starr School, you veer off to the left, and you just go down through an old field, and everything that was Starr, or still the old part, is sitting way over here, and you never see it. But there was 2 discrepancies there about the school. Some say this, some say that. There is a possibility, if you sift through all the mud, that that intersection could have been moved sometime over the whatever. But anyway, Starr School was there, and it moved to its present location in 1909. But it was an early school. Some additional schools that were in the area, it's fairly old, because before you get into the mid-1800s, people were homeschooling their own kids. They were doing it at home. Or a group of people would collect at somebody's house, and one of the ladies in the community would teach them how to read and write and whatever. So you didn't really have formal schooling. The next schools that come along, Ruhama School. There was a school at Ruhama, and it was near Providence Church in that area. Shiloh had a school, was started in 1890. This one kind of threw me back. There was a school in Grove, and they started in 1890 on Highway 184, and it was called Ivy Hollow. Now, I never heard Grove called Ivy Hollow in my life, but it started off as Ivy Hollow and was later changed name to Grove. Now, all these schools collectively, when they start, are in the Starr School District. There was a school at Good Hope, started in 1895, and there were two black schools in the Starr area. One, and you're going to get into a term here, a Starrism, and I'm just going to tell it like I always told it. One was Genesee, Big Genesee School. Now, the proper word is generosity, but everybody, how many people from Starr called Generosity Creek Generosity? How many called it Genesee? Another Starrism. Now, it wasn't because we couldn't speak good English. There were things in the community named generosity. There was generosity black church, there was a generosity this, and people talked about folks had generosity, they gave things away. We knew the word generosity, but when it came to the creek, it was Genesee. Even though, it's supposed to be generosity. But Generosity was a black school, and it was located on Genesee Creek, just close to where the bridge is today on Rainey Road, back up off the road. And there was another wooden black school in 1901, established on Highway 412 or Rainey Road, called today. I couldn't come to the name. I think it was an offshoot of the Generosity School. Today we know it as New Deal, or back up. Today we know it as Tar Island Middle School. But for years and years and years it was known as New Deal. And there was a wooden building built there. And then in the 50s, they came in and built a new brick, larger school. And then in the end of the 60s, when all the schools were desegregation took place and all the schools were mixed together, it became the middle school for District 3. So it's been there, but there's been a school on that site since 1901. So there were schools in the area for a lot of the black folks too. At the same time, other schools were being built. So the schools planned in. So next, we're getting to, okay, how did we get Starr? How did we get this little community? Well, in the midst of all this, now at the time, I'm going to call a few names here, but at the time, when we get into the early 1800s, if you look at most of the land, if you circle out around a little to the east of Starr, most of the people are living this way, but you go to the east of Starr and you come all the way over here to pretty much Savannah River, and you come back to it's a huge splotch of land, and over to the east of Starr, starts boiling down to I tell you about, there were just a few families. Now we'll name the families. The east side, and the east side is represented in here today, the Herons family. Vast amount of property along Wilson Creek over to the east side of Starr. So if you're looking at anything east of where Starr is now, you weren't gonna go build no store over there, because, land's taken, huge farm. You come over to the west side and you look at basically several families. You originally got the McGee's, the Raineys, the Agnews, and the Earls. And they own all the land, from Starr to 29 Highway. Up those four families. Later in the game is where we start coming up with maybe a founder of Starr. You get into the Joneses that are planted kind of right there, the ancestors in Starr. So now you got all these, these people here. So in 1799, a fella arrives, and see, here's another thing too. You go looking up about these people. And an important person, you think, comes to an area. And the historical record is a fella arrives. Now, did he beat down from the Enterprise? I mean, he arrives. Rumor, again, that he had holdings in Abbeville County. Of course, that's like him. So this fellow arrives, and he's John Scott, and he's of means. And he's now, by this time, we've had the revolution, and we're the United States, and we're the state of South Carolina. He gets a grant from the state of a huge amount of property, which encompass what is the town of Starr today, and more property. He acquires that land that basically lies where the town is, the school is, and over toward the Agnews and the Raineys this way, and down toward the McGee's a little bit that way, and over to the east, bumping up against the Herons that way. And he's got this swatch of land, but he really don't want to do nothing with it. So he starts a deal with a fellow named James Jones, who they did say came from Green area, so whatever that is. And James Jones will plant his foot there, and he takes part of the land as a farm or land that he's going to use. And he has this idea that now there's people trying to start up little mercantile businesses here, there, and yonder, and they need some stores. They need people. We're needing something somewhere. So he will sell off tracts of land, small tracts, and he starts doing that. And he brings in the Gentry brothers and Pruitt brothers that are merchants. They want to start up a mercantile business. One goes into, and again, you start getting into these early merchants, and now and some of those families stayed, but the store stays open 6 months or a year, 2 years, somebody else takes. But the Gentrys come in, and the Pruitts come in, and they start a dry good business, a kind of a general store business, and they're starting to have businesses now in the little circle that is Starr, which is that if you look at the town today and what it has been since it's been a town, it is only 1 square mile. The town is 1 square mile. So theoretically, if you stand in the middle, which would be what, the Methodist Church, and you got a half mile this way, so it's not big. But these people start some stuff coming in, and some stores coming in, and he's selling off these tracts. And what he's banking on is these people over here, and a little bit of that happens. If these people over here are going to maybe want a house or a property that's not on the farm. If they want, and their siblings are going to need a place to live, and they don't want to build a house on the farm. So he starts selling tracts of land off, and he's successful. And the family, though, keeps a good portion of the land, the Jones family, and their descendants stay there. And don't know if any of them are still left, but through my life, my living there, they were. At this point, they start calling the place Twigs for some reason. Now, I tried to find out. I think if you ask, you get 100 answers. nobody really knows what Twigs was based on. I don't think it was a person's name, because that name never shows up anywhere. Twigs might have just been, there was a brush arbor or something there, and it was along the road, 81, which was an old Indian trail through there, and which is the route people are taking. And now by this time, people are using 81, they're going down, starting to settle in Iowa, on down. So, Twigs gets tagged is the name. Now, how a lot of these people now start getting associated with Starr that live over here, excuse me, the mail service that they had of the day was rudimentary, ran out of several stores that opened and closed. But the route, if you live anywhere from Starr over to the east about 3 or 4 miles or 5 miles, or all the way to the west about 8 or 9 miles to Savannah River, you were tagged as for the Twigs post drop. So if you start associating something with a name, even people way over there are associating with this thing called Twigs. So then there, even this book has a postmark, Twigs, picture of postmark. So now there's a name to this area, and then things start happening. Now, Starr was lucky. Never had an Indian War. Didn't have a Revolutionary War battle in Starr. The Yankees never came. Never had a Civil War battle. Now, we did have, which would be considered Starr because it was in the Starr mailing district. We did have an incident at Brown's Ferry, which is where Old 29 used to cross Savannah River. And there were several ferries. There was a Brown's Ferry, a Cooley's Ferry, on up. There was an incident after the war was over where the cotton from the Anderson area, a lot of it would go down the river on a barge to Augusta. Well, it was stored there to be put on a barge at Brown's Ferry to go down the river at the end of the war, and the Union Army confiscated it. So there's all this cotton that the farmers, the cotton's confiscated. And they had some guards down there, and I won't get into all the details, I'll just run across the top of it. They had some guards down there guarding the cotton, because we weren't going to let the people who owned the cotton sell the cotton. They were taking the cotton, gonna be their cotton. Well, the guards get killed one night. And the other troops rush in, and it doesn't change the deal on the cotton. Nobody got the cotton. But they did arrest, and I will leave these names, did arrest several people, 3 or 4 people from Anderson County that basically got charged with doing it. And this thing turned into a big national scandal. They take them to Washington, they try to try them, and then they don't, and then they don't have evidence, then they're going to turn them loose, and then they're not going to turn them loose. And this thing goes on for a period of a year or so, and finally Johnson was president then. He did something and they turned him loose. So they never really got sentenced to anything. That was really the only thing. So Starr, hadn't had a calamity. The folks in Starr got along. They hadn't had any Hatfield and McCoy incidences or whatever. So, but things start to change, and it changes also what happens in Starr. Now, a big event occurred for the whole county in 1826. Now, can I venture an answer from the audience of what happened in Anderson County in 1826?
Pendleton District divided.
Pendleton District divided. Up until then, Anderson and Pickens County were one thing, the Pendleton District. The time came that it was too big, too much distance. The powers that be says we got to split it. So we're gonna put a courthouse in Pendleton, Pickens. We're gonna put one in Anderson. So I'll leave Pickens out of it. They send a crew down to Anderson, and they had a spot of about a mile that they could choose. They choose a spot where the historic courthouse is today. There was a little bit of a typical of the day. There wasn't, one thing you got to understand that we get to 1826 and back behind it, there ain't no Anderson. See, it wasn't like Anderson's up here doing something and stuff. Anderson wasn't, there wasn't nothing in Anderson. There was a tavern and maybe a couple of little dry goods stores. So they go to the tavern after walking through the main street, which is the same main street as today, which was another Indian trail. It went all the way from above Clemson to down way below McCormick and Abbeville and McCormick, and was used by everybody, and then it's wound up being a paved road, and it's still there today, the basic road that was there that the Indians made. So they get in the foot, they go to the tavern and probably had a refreshing drink, and they get in a fuss, and finally one of them gets mad, and he walks out the tavern, and the tavern now would be sitting, how many remember where Woolworths used to be on the square? The tavern would have been sitting about where Woolworths is. He walks out and he walks up to the open air before he gets to the dirt road there that was the General's Road through here. And he takes a stick and sticks it in the ground, and he turns around and threatens the rest of them and tells them, this is where it's going to be now. I don't want to hear no more foolishness, and we're going back to Pendleton. Now, when you bring courthouse to an area back then, you brought industry, you brought things. The administrative people were split up in Pendleton, half go to Pickens, half come to Anderson. Things start growing, and Anderson starts growing. So that would have an effect, and that also would have an effect on Starr, because now there's a town really growing quick up north of it. The next thing that comes along that was a big change was train. Train comes along, and this is an interesting story. I used to think it was a lie when I was a kid, but it turns out it is the truth. The train comes through, and it's going to come up through Starr. And this was in 1886, 87. There's really no town. They're calling the little community, and there's some houses been built there, because I'm back up to the first residence that was actually built in this zone that James Jones set up in Starr was built by John and Mabel Gentry. And the Gentry was one of the Gentrys that came in 80 years earlier with the store. Mabel, his wife, was a Rainey. So she'd been over yonder with them heathens, for a while. So they get married, and they build the first house in 1838. And I got a picture of it that was in Starr, built in Starr. So now Starr's got some things. Here comes the railroad, and they decide they need to group this thing a little more formal. So they decide they're going to form a town, and they did decide in the throes of waiting on the railroad that they were going to call the town Twigs. Now, back up a little bit more, there's also now a post office in Starr. There's a U.S. post office. It was established in 1830, which is early for a place like Starr. So there's a U.S. post office, and guess what it is? It is the Twigs post office. So they're going to name this town Twigs. Well, before they get it all formally done, and the paperwork and whatever has to happen, and through the legislature and all this, the train starts its service in 1887. And it's passenger service and freight service. They are so taken by the engineer of the train, his name was Captain W. Starr. This guy must have been, a charismatic character. That within a very short time, before they got ever officially called as a town or certified Twigs, they decided to name Starr after him. And when they got it certified 2 years later, excuse me, 2 years later, it was Starr. So that's how Starr got his name. If you had to pick a founding father, I guess you'd have to go back to James Jones, because he was the one that said, I'm going to cut this thing up into parcels, and it went from there. Now, I have some pictures and we can talk through. We got some time left, thank goodness. And please, questions. So it's an interesting story. And there's some stories that later on. And later on, and I'll wrap all this up quickly because there's so much happening. Later on now, the town starts changing. You got railroad service now. You got some people moving in. Later on, you hear different names that a lot of us in my generation were familiar with. You hear your Moshe name, and you hear the Pettigrew name, and you hear those names because those people came in the 1800s, kind of same way. Now you can buy land there. Now you can do things. They start with small things and morph it into bigger things. The Moshe's wound up starting off with just a little feed and seed, and then as cotton becomes bigger and bigger and a big crop, they build a cotton gin, and now they got the cotton gin, now they got the seed and feed. Pettigrews come in with a small store, then they enlarge it, and it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets bigger. And then really in its day, it was a big store, big 2-story building, big long building, had all kind of stuff in there, and lasted a long time. You're talking about stuff going from the teens in the early 1900s up into the 1960s, 1970s, and being a fixture and star. But then nothing much ever moves in, or nothing much ever takes place. But it putters on, and it does its thing. Now, there's some interesting things about Starr that we got to tell. The isms, which are true. I jotted a few things down. Well, I jotted them down, and what did I do with them? Oh, here we go. The oldest house was John and Mabel Gentry, built in 1838. We talked about that. In 1885, a tornado comes through Starr, and it blew a wagon wheel spoke through a 6x8 oak timber, straight through it, and sticking out. Now, I was told as a kid, and don't know what y'all were told, I was told as a kid that this thing was a wagon wheel spoke went through an oak tree. And that's how the spot. But actually, it was a 6x8 oak timber. This thing, they took that timber in 1886. When I tell you Starr is known far and wide, it was on display in Vancouver, British Columbia at the World's Fair in 1886. It now resides in the Smithsonian. So Starr has an article in the Smithsonian. Now this one, I did not make this up. This come out of the book. In 1926, there were 25 households of Raineys living between Weems Creek and Genesee Creeks. I tell you, I grew up around everybody was kin to me. In 1930, they had just concreted Highway 81 from tar and gravel through Starr down to Iowa. So it's concrete now. And those of us that are old timers remember the old concrete road before they asphalted. In 1930, when that was complete, Miss Anna Dean Jones, which was Miss Anna Dean Pennington, my teacher, Miss Dorothy Gentry and others, roller skated from Starr to Iowa and back. So that was in the end. In 1962, Moshe's Cotton Gin baled 2,501 bales of cotton. Now, that's another thing that this presentation covers a big scope. A lot of people don't realize cotton was a big thing in Starr. It was a big thing in Anderson County. It was a big thing in South Carolina. Do you know that in the heydays of cotton from the early 1900s up into the 1960s, that Anderson County was the second largest cotton producing county in the state of South Carolina. Also, even though most of us wonder, well, where was it? Anderson County for many years in that span was the second richest county in the state of South Carolina because of cotton. Cotton was king. Cotton was cash. So that was cotton. During World War II, now I got to put a little bit of political spin on this one. It is true. The statement is true. But you ever heard the term figures don't lie, but liars figure? It's kind of that kind of thing. It's true. But it's because there was such a great shift or tilt in the numbers or the percentages that made it be true. But there was a survey after World War II, and for some reason people were interested in towns and cities, and people served in the war, in World War II, in the military. And they asked all these cities to submit the number of people that served, and then the number of people that were commissioned officers, lieutenants, captains, whatever. In World War II, Starr had the highest per capita percentage of officers than any other town in the country, or any other city in the country. Now again, it wasn't that everybody was an officer. It was, there probably was 70 people in the military, and if 5 of them, yeah, but excuse me, they hold that record. Highest capita in the country for military officers. And you hear of Starr. And Starr, we got 10 minutes. So Starr, people from Starr run into things. There's a couple of stories I hope we have time to tell, but I do want to show these pictures. Starr gets scattered far and wide, and you wouldn't think about it. Look at some pictures. So you can, this is a picture of Brown's Ferry. And Brown's Ferry was the one for up until 1920. Now, didn't have a bridge across the Savannah River until 1920. Until 1920, you went down 29 South, you had to hop the ferry, because if you will look on the ferry, what do you see? Cars. And this is Brown's Ferry. This is where the infamous cotton deal took place. And it was an important ferry in the area that people went through, that people used. This is an old picture of Mountain Creek. I think it was taken, according to the inscription, in 1918. Now, the church may have changed and been modernized. Some of these buildings have. Now, cotton gin. This is Milk State's cotton gin in the 1890s. And you can see how much cotton is there in the 1890s. And they're bringing it in by, they're ginning it, stacking it up, people hauling it off in wagons. Cotton was big. That's the original Starr School. Now, there's some of us in here remember that building. My first 5 years of school, the building was there and used. And then it was torn down and a new school was built. Ruhaman Church, still there today, doesn't look like this. But this was taken before anything. This was taken in the 30s. Small church, used to set back from the Savannah River, and was lucky enough, it was on high enough ground that it did not get covered by the lake. Because a lot of the people over in the Wilford community and Shiloh community and Saddles Creek community, that property got covered by the lake. It's gone. Now, Pruitt House. Pruitt House is known far and wide. It was operated, best I could tell, from the probably around 1919 up to 1950. Had its heyday when the train would come through, because the train depot and the train stop was right there across the street from where the Pruitt House was, sitting on what was called First Avenue, right across the railroad tracks. Had fabulous meals. People would eat there when they get off the train and eat and get back on the train. So a lot of people from a lot of places knew about the Pruitt House. A lot of people would hear about the Pruitt House in faraway places. My daddy was asked about it when he was in World War II in Sicily before they launched the invasion on Italy. And the general that was interviewing him to be his bodyguard, had been through Starr and had aided the Pruitt House over the years, and he mentions the Pruitt House. He said, Starr, I've heard of Starr, my daddy like fell over. Because if you were from Starr and you're away from home, here's what happens. Where are you from? Starr. You get that look. Well, that's right below Anderson. Well, sometimes you still get a look. And then you start talking about Greenville. Yeah. Well, when you go somewhere and you say I'm from Starr, oh yeah, Starr. It kind of, yeah. So Starr was known to them. And he specifically mentioned the Pruitt House.
So you said this was on First Avenue?
Mm-hmm. It was in operation from the 19-teens until it burned in 1950. There's a menu from 1925 that I was able to find. And you can see what, you can see the menu. And it was $1.25. But it looks like a pretty good meal. Didn't have the experience my daddy had, but I had an experience with Starr, also in the military. I'm at Fort Lewis, Washington, which is out on the West Coast, down from Seattle. And went off post to a diner with a couple of guys. Now the guys with me from New Jersey. And we come in and we order, and it was kind of like this Mel's Diner thing, or like Murph's used to be in Anderson. The guy that owns it's cooking the hamburgers over here. And the lady takes the orders, and I ordered a hamburger, I think it's sweet tea, and he hollers back and said, hey, son, I said, where are you from, Georgia? And I said, no, I'm South Carolina. He said, where about South Carolina? I said, I'm from Starr. And he sets his spatula down. He turns around and he says, Starr, you from Starr, South Carolina? And I said, yeah. And I'm commencing to get ready to tell him. He said, and I won't call her name. He said, do you know this fella? And he told me the guy's name. Well, yeah, you. I said, oh yeah, I know him. Well, is he still alive? Well, yeah. Now this fella's my daddy's age, I'm talking to. He said, well, you know, I was in the Navy with that fella. And we did this, and he said, you wouldn't happen to have his address, I'd write him a letter. Now, again, those days, the address is easy, around 1 star. So, anyway, so it come up with me, Starr, way off. But anyway, this is one of the old houses. I think in some of these I made, because these are old pictures, and before I came along, it was built in 1940, it may have changed, but I'm thinking this may have been the house up on Agnew Road, just around Starr. Another one would have been, I think, is the Smith House at 81, and 181 and 412. This is where home was built by one of the Moshes in 1918, and by Levis, you can probably speak up, these houses probably still there. Mm-hmm. I mean, but now you gotta get off of the new 81, and this is a Frank Gentry. Built in 1921. He would have been one of the Gentrys that started the original stores. This is the home of Mr. and Miss Curtis Pennington. Miss Pennington was the teacher I talked about. Her ancestors are the Joneses that started, and this is part of their old family property. This is the first house ever built in Starr, what it looked like in 1938, maybe or later probably, but Mabel Gentry and John Gentry. This one's up on north of Starr. It's about my old house in 1908. So there's a lot of old architecture in and around Starr. So this is now I think Kenneth McGee lives there, but this would be the old McGee home place where they were centered. And the date says prior to 1850, but this house was probably built in the 1820s or earlier. Or it was probably redone in 1850 from a smaller house. house. That's what happened to a lot of them. This is my family's old home place. This picture was taken probably in the 30s. Original house, it was built in this form, and I can talk about this one. In this form in 1832, this is what it would look like. Now, if you get to this part back here, part of that part back there was part of the old original log cabin that was built in the 1700s. A couple of walls of it. They tore down the way this house evolved was from a log cabin, then a bigger log cabin, and then when they came in and did all this in 1832, part of the walls of the old other log cabin are still there. And it may look, and it's been redone since this. It's been redone. Now this, I think you're talking about Edgar, this is where he would be. This is where he would be. This is home Albert Lynn, built in the early 20s. Tommy McGee lived in this house. Now, I don't know who it was previous to him, but built in 1910. Now, this is Mr. and Ms. Marshall Stone. Now, Miss Beth Stone is also from the Jones clan. She is Miss Pennington's sister. And this house is directly across Highway 181 from the Pennington house on the Jones property. But this would have been the main Jones house here. Now, Evergreen Plantation, a lot of people may have been to events there. The museum used to have events there, the other people's had them. But this house was built in 1920 by Paul Earl, who was one of the Earl family in the area. And it's over near Shiloh Church on Highway 187. And this would have been Pettigrew House, built prior to 1840. So this is one of the Pettigrews start coming in the 1800s when after Jones people were coming in. That's an old house. And